Welcome to Rebuilding a Digital Brand. Thank you all so much for being here and getting out there in the rain and the cold. I am Linda Eliasen. That's my Twitter handle. And today I'm going to talk to you about my experience in building brands. But first, I want to just tell you a little bit about myself and give you a little bit of my background. So I was raised in this part of our planet in Fayetteville, Georgia. My dad is a preacher, and I spent about every single day of my life in this building. I just spent every day learning about Jesus and Satan and how to be a proper young lady. And there were a lot of rules to follow in this world. The only music that I was allowed to listen to was Christian music, so I was really into Michael W. Smith. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's really hot. And I also loved DC Talk. They were really cool heartthrobs at the time. From a really young age, I liked to draw, but early on with the church as my only influence, I think my art took a really weird and dark turn. And I was that kid who loved horses and dolls and watching birds. So needless to say, I had a lot of friends and I was really cool. Life was really weird for me back then. I was basically handed a life and some skin that I didn't quite feel like I belonged in. So it felt very strange. But one day, all of that changed when I was flipping through the channels on TV. We only had basic cable, but this came on. Oh my God, you guys, this was amazing. For some reason, my parents let me watch an entire episode, and I was just changed forever. We eventually got cable, and then my love for The Simpsons grew into love for shows like Saturday Night Live and The Kids in the Hall. And these shows meant so much to me. They meant that somewhere in this world, grown-ups were getting out of bed, and instead of going to a chapel to write a sermon or going to work on spreadsheets, they could go and make stuff like this. I was I want to be one of those adults someday so badly. So I kept drawing, and my style started to get a little bit whimsical. I started to play with color, and this was my dad. I was putting him in a slightly inconvenienced position by being a little cold. I would even use doodles as a way to express my complex emotions, like my jealousy over my sister's cute boyfriend, and I would draw him like he was ugly. And I'd also practice some sass by drawing the mean girl at school as a horse, and I'd say things like that she doesn't believe in washing her face. Yeah, take that, Ashley. Anyways, through cartoons, I had found my personal freedom. I was awkwardly figuring my voice out, but by creating the world that I wanted to live in on paper, I was actually building this power and confidence that I needed to get out of Dodge. I eventually did, too. I ended up here at the Atlanta College of Art, which was a part of the High Museum in Atlanta, Georgia. I majored in graphic design in a very Swiss and rigid design environment. It was the best experience that I've ever had, and at the end of my junior year, I was offered an internship at Cartoon Network. At this point, it seemed like I was kind of figuring it out, I was doing the thing I wanted to do as a little kid. And I worked really hard while I was there and learned some new things about illustration and design from the pros. And after being nice to enough people and wiggling my way through the halls, I met some people who then gave me an internship at Adult Swim. And this was my goal growing up, was to be an adult who made cartoons. So I felt like I was just on the cusp of it all. But while I was here, I had to learn how to break all of those rules that I had just learned in design school, and not alone in my notebook, like that horse drawing. I had to do it out loud and in public, and that was so vulnerable. So this is an actual project. On a project like this one, my art director kept getting frustrated with me and telling me that my lines needed to be, quote, shittier. They weren't shitty enough. And he would send me back, until finally he was like, you know what, go to the window over there and use your left hand, I'm right-handed, and draw it standing up to get those lines to loosen up. And in these moments, I realized that I'm actually, I kind of do like some rules, and maybe I'm not quite ready to break them all out loud like this. So I didn't quite know where that left me. What do I do from here? Well, you know what? It didn't matter, because it was the recession. There were no jobs for anyone anywhere. A lot of the people I would just spent my time interning for, they lost their jobs as well. So it was like really a heartbreaking time for a lot of us, except for this guy. He looks like he's having a really great time. So after like 14 failed job interviews in my first year after school, I finally met this guy. This is Freddie von Schimpenheimer IV. While the recession meant a death sentence for a lot of companies, it was the beginning for this new little company in Atlanta called MailChimp. And luckily, they were right down the street from where I lived, and they needed a junior designer. So thus began my accidental relationship with tech. This place I fell in love with. I could still make cartoons, and I could still tell stories, and I could still inject humor into my artwork, but in a safe space that like still had some rules, and it still had some structure, with lots of goals to reach and a few ladders to climb here and there, which I really like. I learned a lot about digital brands along these journeys, so let's start talking about that now. What is a brand, everyone? I bet there are a lot of opinions in this room. Brand is not just a logo. Brand is a lot more than just finding that perfect font. A brand is a whole lot more than just shapes and colors. A brand is the way you make people feel. So let's talk about some companies that make you feel good. Nike makes you feel empowered. Sonos makes you feel pretty cool, pretty at ease, kind of zen. Ford makes you feel tough. And Pillsbury maybe makes you feel a little bit squishy. So what about brands that kind of bum you out or that make you feel bad or that have a bad image? Chipotle, super delicious. But there is an entire South Park episode dedicated to what it does to your body. They need to work on that. IKEA, they make really great stuff, but shopping there with your partner will definitely result in a breakup. Comcast, I just have to put this logo up here, and you all know the fury and rage that is dealing with their customer support. And lastly, the DMV. Talk about the worst brand of all time. If you want to know how to build a great brand, you can just basically do exactly the opposite of whatever the DMV has done, because they've made every wrong decision that a brand can make. They have no discernible logo. There's no consistency in their font choice. Their color palette is all over the place, depending on what state you're in. And every state can redesign or even rename their DMV, like the DDS in Georgia, whatever that is. But yet they've managed to create a really consistent brand experience for everyone who's ever been there. Like, nobody has ever left the DMV saying, wow, what a delightful experience, or whatever. No, you're all thinking it when you're there. You're like, I hate my life. I really hate that I just cried in front of a bunch of strangers. And like, they have a mascot, but it's this guy. And I just think that that's like really rude. He's just there while you're in line. Anyways, throwing shade is really fun, and it's really easy, and that's why things like Designer News and Design Twitter exist. But what does it take to build a brand that doesn't suck? These are just some of the things that I've learned, and I just kind of wanted to share some personal stories with you all today about some of the more unusual things that go into building a brand. So to me, to build a great brand, in the world of tech and this digital environment that we're in, things move so fast. And that's just the nature of it. But in my experience, to give a brand some life that feels genuine and real, you have to give things more time than you're comfortable with. You have to give things more space than you might think is necessary. It starts from the top, from your CEO and your leadership. And as a leader of a brand, you have to give people permission to be intensely weird and different. You have to give people autonomy to take risks, and you have to show them that you believe in them and that you believe in giving them that space. Basically, you just have to let people be creative. This was actually one of our mottos at MailChimp back in the day when I first started. And here's how we followed that guiding principle. When I joined, this was what MailChimp looked like before our first rebrand. This was back in '08, so 10 years ago. Crazy. They were pretty cutting edge at the time, and really small, too. There were about 30 of us on the team. The founders were pretty chill dudes, and they let us get away with a lot. It wasn't uncommon for an engineer to change copy at the last minute to spruce things up. Like, check this out. They just called the abuse desk and the legal documentation boring stuff. Right next to overheard on Twitter, somebody's like talking shit about Constant Contact, and we're just like, yep, that's homepage material right there. Down to every detail, I knew that I was in the right place. So one of my first projects at MailChimp was kind of a loose prompt. It was something like, come up with a few ideas for things we can send to our customers to make them feel happy. So I spent a lot of time developing this little felt version of our mascot. I got really caught up in the technical aspects of this and was really excited to be learning about like manufacturing constraints and the process of making a physical thing. And it was one of my first projects, so I like really wanted it to be good. And when I finally finished, I felt like it was like perfect and ready to go. So I sent it to the CEO, to Ben Chestnut, and I had to get approval. And I was so nervous because I was like new, but he just like sat there and looked at it and spent a minute thinking. And he was like, Linda, do you think that our mascot has a butt? I was like, what? Okay, sure. So I gave the dude a butt, and we did a few variations back and forth. We actually had like at least 3 back and forths of different butts to get it right. But from that day on, this guy has a butt. And this is the great thing about brand evolution. Brand work is like improv. In improv, it's not a one-man show. It's yes and. That's what the rule is. So whatever your partner says to you, you just agree with what they're saying and you add to it. And that's going to take you to an unusual and funny place. So in that moment, our CEO, who probably had way better things to do than to talk to me about my stuffed animal that I had worked really hard on, he just was very genuine and real and said, yes, this is a stuffed animal. And yes, it has a butt. And so designers at MailChimp have continued to iterate on this and do that yes and. So there are versions where the butt now has a heart tattoo on it. And that initial choice that we made 10 years ago, people are still having fun with. And then there's this one. They've really like made some choices in toning up the butt. Like, look at how buff that thing is. But this is 10 years of butt evolution, guys. This shit takes time. There have been thousands of little choices like these at MailChimp, and I know we have MailChimp people here today giving a talk. So, hey, I love you. And it's just thousands of weird little conversations like those that when you let them pop up and you give them space to exist, like really magical things can happen. And you need to let that happen. Another thing that I've learned about doing great creative work is by feeling trusted and like I have the space to independently explore and to let that weirdness in. So space, it's important, but how do you do that? Well, I know how you don't do it. One thing that's not effective is to inject fear into your designers. It's not great great design is not born out of fear. It's born out of excitement for the stuff that you're doing. And you shouldn't talk to your employees like you're an old-timey grandpa, or make them feel guilty for being excited about things that aren't related to the brand. Even if it's not visibly moving some needle on some metric, you'd be surprised at how impactful some of these like so-called time wasters can actually be on your brand. So you need to learn to trust your people, and you have to let go of a lot of control. It's really hard as a manager to give people autonomy sometimes. We're afraid that if we leave people alone for too long, they'll get off track, they'll miss deadlines. But it's when we let people feel trusted that they feel more comfortable getting vulnerable and sharing their weird ideas with you. After all, that's why you hire people. You know, you get their unique perspective that nobody else has. And sometimes to make them feel comfortable sharing that perspective with you, you have to give them lots of space, like this dog. So basically what I'm saying is just like leave people alone sometimes. It's okay. So when I was at Dropbox, I was the first designer on this product called Paper. We had one other design lead, a couple of engineers, and a PM. It was such a fun process. I basically felt like a little kid in a clubhouse with no parents around. Like, we didn't have anyone telling us what to do. We were just building the thing that we wanted, and it was pretty great. But with all of that freedom, we were able to build the product that we actually wanted to use every day. Like, every discussion that we had was like, yeah, but would I actually use this? Would I actually enjoy using this? So while we were working on this, there were moments that always scared me, and this was the moment of starting a document. That's so much pressure when you're about to sit down and write something and share it with people. And we had experimented with all kinds of empty states like title, body copy, really exciting stuff, you know? But one night I was like alone in my bedroom working. I worked a lot back then. And I just decided to put some words in here that comforted me. This is the first sentence to the book Peter Pan. It felt really nice having something sweet and familiar here, and it just kind of took the pressure off. So I kept going, and I wrote out the beginnings of other novels I hadn't written yet, kind of as a reminder to maybe read it someday. Or if I'd like write something sarcastically inspirational that lives inside my head. I'm very sarcastic, so there's things like, you are a shining star, you are a tiny masterpiece. That was me just giving myself shit for being too precious about the work that I was too scared to start doing. And it's still in the product today. I don't know why they haven't taken it down yet, but thank you. So branding doesn't have to be loud or colorful or a butt. It doesn't have to be crazy. Sometimes it's something as simple as a sentence that makes you feel good. And in a product like Paper, a product we intentionally decided to keep as simple as possible, it was one of the few moments to make the brand connection with the users. Now, rebranding, really scary, right? Why would a company even want to rebrand? Well, a brand is the establishing of an opinion and a point of view. But sometimes a brand might grow up and realize that their image doesn't really reflect the values that they hold anymore. So it's time to realign. A company might feel really great on the inside, like, yay! But then what you see on the outside does not actually match your expectations. So it's time for a do-over. So after Dropbox, I joined this little agency in San Francisco called Wano. And when I joined, this was all that we had as far as brands go. We had some white space, a logo, a circle, and some bright colors. And like a weird Icelandic guy as our founder named Halli. We decided that we wanted a new website and a new brand to go with it. And since we were a new agency with not a ton of work to show, we decided to just make up the work that we wanted to show with our friends. And we created stuff that we'd want to be hired for to make in the future. It was pretty brilliant. So we decided to just start from where we were. And we built the brand around that weird Icelandic man and the ideas in his head when he started this thing in the first place. We hired a friend, Brent Couchman, to come in and do some identity work for us. He helped us find our new logo. And while this logo was being developed, I was busy chipping away at Halli, our founder's head, trying to find the words and values and things that the brand was being born from. And this is what we came up with, more or less. Pretty simple. Meanwhile, Brent was doing some amazing things with our identity, helping us to decide what our structure would be. So this is how we would play. Wano sitting on all white with lots of breathing room and something colorful and fun beside it. So we set out to create an image, just one image for our website. And we found someone's work who we really liked, a photo studio called Mathery, and we sent them a sketch. They were surprisingly not weirded out by the sketch that we sent them. And they got on board, and they yes-anded the thing that we sent. So then we slapped our logo on top, and we were all like, yeah, that feels like us. Cool. But what about it feels like us? Something about this moment in particular felt perfect. Something about how it's floaty and weird and fun, and it doesn't take itself too seriously, and there are organic lines meeting hard lines and shapes. We're like, okay, well, what else does it look like? Maybe it looks like this, or this. And so we kept hiring our friends to make us stuff so that when clients came into the office, they would see the image that we were trying to be. They would see the feeling that we were trying to evoke. They could get a feel for the kind of people that we were, and what we wanted to make for them. It kind of helped us to set the mood. And all we had to do was send, as an art director, I would just talk to artists over the phone and be like, hey, I really like your style. Do you think you can help us come up with something that feels like these things? And then we would come up with ideas together. Sometimes it was a full-on brainstorming session. It was just really great. And even if it was like a very utilitarian piece of software, we would do our best to represent them in a way that doesn't suck and doesn't feel boring. And for our personal identity, that white space came back in. And those colors were there to create all the feelings that we wanted to help make people feel. And so they're continuing to evolve this brand today. So now I'm at Help Scout. When I joined Help Scout, they did have a brand. They had been around for 7 years. A lot of people don't know this. They have 75 employees, all remote. We all work remotely. And my team currently has 5 designers. Of those designers, 2 of them were able to work on this brand with me, while still maintaining all of their other projects on the side. New releases were happening. There was a lot of work to do. But we decided, let's give ourselves like 5 months and just see what happens. And what we had wasn't bad. Like, I don't think that what we had was terrible. It was just somewhat opinionless. We felt like we had built a culture and a new opinion that wasn't shining through from this website anymore. So once again, we had to start from where we were. And I sat down with the co-founders, and these people who kind of thought they had no idea what their brand should look like, when asked to write down a lot of things, they turned out to have a lot of opinions. They knew what we were, and they knew exactly what values we wanted to represent as a brand. So then we decided that illustration would be right for us, and that we'd set out to discover our new style with an illustrator that I was friends with from Dropbox named Alice Lee. She helped us along the way to figure out who we were and what we looked like, and she was so incredibly patient. We took a bunch of different styles and we looked at them. So these are just mood boards. But if you see in the bottom left, we started to develop a scale from bright and playful to trustworthy and helpful, from enthusiastic to sophisticated. And we would just get a gut check on each and every person in the room on each of these mood boards. And we talked about what worked for us, what didn't, what was too playful, too childish, too cartoony. And this might seem super obvious, but this really did help us to all create what I like to call the hive mind, you know? Like, we're all sharing the same brain now about this brand and what it is. So we started to take these illustrations and mock them up with our UI and with our branding, just to see how it would all come together, even before beginning the work of creating our own style. Sometimes we really loved what we saw, but it just didn't feel like us. And with other styles, we felt like we were like on the right path, but it needed some tweaking. So we kept exploring. And this initial process really only took a few weeks. But it's really important work, because at the end of it, we were able to nail down exactly this like scale that we could refer back to as we started our style. So we realized that like human beings are super important for Help Scout. We're a company that is all about people helping people. So we needed to nail down the human aspect of it. What does this person look like? How simple? How realistic? We kind of ended somewhere in between the first two. So then, once we had our people, I was like, what kind of expressions do they make? They're more than just like thumbs up. People are more complex than that. People are sometimes scared and excited or surprised. And then we started to look at regular things like furniture. This was especially fun. We ended up like illustrating so many of our pets. It's crazy. And then finally, we ended up with these people, and we put them on our pricing page, you know, one of the more sterile pages. But when we saw this, we were just like, fuck yeah, that is us. All right, let's get specific now. So then we started to look at things like backgrounds, and we got so obsessed with these little details. By the way, those were different. Could you tell? Probably not, and that's okay. Because we were having conversations all the way down to like what color of a shadow should be, and like whether that was more on brand to be a pink shadow than a green shadow. And these conversations made so much sense to all of us because we were sharing that mind space. And by the way, like obviously number 2 was the style that we went with. And suddenly this CEO who felt like he didn't have a lot of opinions about this brand thing, he's like, well, of course I know exactly which plant we are. So after 7 years of history, it turns out that they had a lot more opinions than they thought. And it was really awesome to be able to show them all the way to this. And this is where we landed. This is our homepage and our homepage illustration, and it took us some real time and a lot of weird conversations, like, who is this guy? What does he do? What's his name? What is she handing him? We realized we knew a lot more about the brand just by talking about this person and what his job is. His name is Troy. He's a fashion designer, obviously. And we re-illustrated this situation like 6 different times, though. Like, it was like a gardener at one point, and then it was like a high-end boutique. And we were like, no, it needs to be a little bit less high-end. Like, Troy looks like an asshole. Take his glasses off. Like, we just spent hours talking about who this customer is. And those types of conversations, again, are just super important to have, even if they feel pointless and weird while you're having them. And through all of those conversations, we were able to take a page that looked like this in the past and turn it into something like this. And it just feels like something, you know? Like, this was fine. This was designed well. Like, the type was good, the spacing was good. But this makes me feel like, I can do things with my life. Yay. And so that's the conversation about the Help Scout brand. And these are the people that we feel like represent us the best, because they actually look like people, you know? So to sum everything up, I want to say a thing I hear a lot. This idea of getting weird, what does that mean? Well, brands are just like people. We're all different. We all have unique ideas and opinions and senses of humor. And the truer that we are to ourselves, the better we make each other feel, and the better our work gets. So I want you to feel empowered to give people space, to try new things, to look like something else that you've never seen before, and to just genuinely be yourselves. Thank you.